Welcome to episode 33 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. Now, before we get going with this episode of the podcast, which will take us on journeys to Istanbul and across Czechia, I'm going to conduct a little experiment, so bear with me on this. When I'm not out cycling, writing the books, maintaining the website cyclingeurope.org, making films for the Cycling Europe YouTube channel, tweeting and Instagramming at Cycling Europe, or of course making this podcast, I'm a qualified teacher. I spent 16 years teaching French in secondary schools in Berkshire and Oxfordshire before returning to Yorkshire in 2015, and I now work as a humble supply teacher in schools near the towns of Halifax and Huddersfield. Many students I teach I might only ever meet once, and the fact that I have an interesting life outside of teaching never gets mentioned. Why would it? Sometimes, however, especially if I've been working in one school over an extended period, the students discover that I have written the books, have a YouTube channel and make this podcast, and they ask me about it. The middle of a lesson is not usually the best time to discuss such things, but I do wonder if the pupils ever actually listen to the podcast or watch any of the videos. So here's my little experiment. If you're a student at Brooksbank School in Elland, the school I attended as a pupil myself, and the school where I've been teaching English for much of this academic year, this message is for you. Come and tell me that you've heard me mention Brooksbank. I'll be impressed that you actually do listen to at least the first few minutes of the podcast. Hopefully you'll also keep listening to the end. The stories you're about to hear may inspire you to plan your own future adventures. So, on with the show. Later in the podcast, we'll be hearing from Robin Watkins, who will be reflecting on his cycling journey through Czechia. But first, we're heading off along the EuroVelos 15, 6 and 13 to Istanbul with cyclists and filmmakers Matt and Harriet Hall.
My name is Matt.
I'm Harriet.
And essentially we cycled the width of Europe a couple of years ago in the summer of 2018. We've been together now for 5.5 years.
Yeah, got married last year.
And I eventually got Harriet into cycling. We both work in the travel industry, so we always love travel, and we'd never really done cycle touring, I suppose, before. I'd done a couple of shorter long weekends, Wales and Lake District, that kind of thing, and then always commuted to work.
This was a brand new adventure for us both, really.
Yeah.
So you decide to set off to cycle to Istanbul. Now this is, as you said, this is a couple of years ago. This is back in summer of 2018, but you've recently started to make some quite long videos, of which the first one has just been published. That's taking you along the Rhine, and that's kind of probably the section we're going to talk most about in the next whatever number of minutes. But you've also got 2 other videos coming up, I think, one for the Danube section and then one for the bit on the end between where the Danube stops and where Istanbul starts, yeah?
That's right.
Yeah, that's it. It's been a real labour of love, actually, over the last... Well, lockdown's been good for it because we've had quite a bit of free time, so I decided to make all of our little clip videos and episodes into 3 series. So going down the Rhine and then following the Danube all the way to Romania, and then the last bit, so that bit needs a bit of work on the title, the EuroVelo 13 bit, which we'll come on to. But we set off really just to get a break from work, and because, like I said, we love travel and would love to see more of Europe, and it's a great value way to do it. We did it on a pretty strict budget.
We hadn't particularly intended to make a film of the trip. That wasn't the intention, and actually it wasn't really filmed in a way that would create a film or these longer episodes. We'd originally just wanted to record the experience for ourselves and to share with our family and friends. Matt had been editing those pretty simply on the go and uploading them to YouTube along the way, and we just really enjoyed looking back at them. And then once we came home after the 3 months away, found that actually quite a lot of people were interested in the videos. They were watching them, they were commenting on them, and that kept going over the couple of years since we did the tour. So that really suggested that there was quite a lot of interest out there for maybe slightly more of a guide to those sections of cycle touring within Europe.
Okay, we'll come back to the video itself in a few minutes. But before we do that, you mentioned, Matt, that you were cycle commuting. Had you done any trips, either of you, on a bike, any long-distance bike trips before setting off to cycle to Istanbul?
Yeah, so my cycle commuting was pretty typical around London, wasn't very far each day. I had a few friends that really were quite into cycle touring and doing a bit of a longer trip. So with my brother, we went up to Lake District and we did 4 or 5 days around there. And then we did a north to south in Wales. And that's the first time I kind of bought panniers, and I felt this is something I really enjoy. This is really good fun. And again, it was quite good value holidays, long weekends. And I was really inspired by some books, and I know you've mentioned before in your podcast as well, but Mark Beaumont's books and his movies on the BBC, I think they came out, I guess I was maybe early 20s, and I watched those, that what was it called, the Man Who Cycled the World, and I was really, really inspired by that. I thought that looks so fun, so we went off and did a couple of those, and then I did a small European tour. So myself and my friend Tom, we cycled over to Holland, and then we did a small couple of days back down to France, and then back up from Dover, which was the hardest part. So that's just a 4-day small charity cycle. So I've done 3 or 4 smaller long weekenders, and I just always dreamt of doing a really long one, and I suppose just needed to find a way to take that much time off work but keeping my job. And then when I met Harriet,
I'd never done any cycle touring before. I'd never carried a tent on a bike. I'd never really cycled further than a couple of hours, so it was all new to me. But the idea of travelling around Europe, of seeing all these different countries that we'd never been to before and might not have the opportunity to see in that way, was really exciting to me. I actually started on our first trial sort of night away from London out into the countryside on my little old mountain bike that I was given for my, I think, 14th birthday. It was purple and quite small, with absolutely no facilities for carrying anything on, so completely useless in that respect. But just started out, gave it a go, and fell in love with it along the way.
You clearly you didn't need persuading in terms of the travel, but did you need persuading in terms of getting on the bike and doing it on a bike? Was that a hard sell for Matt, Harriet?
It surprisingly wasn't, I don't think. No. I was just up for the challenge, and it never once crossed my mind that we couldn't complete the trip, that we wouldn't get to Istanbul. I don't know why. I should have been more nervous about it, to be honest. But no, it didn't take a huge amount of persuasion.
We almost went in quite ignorantly, in the way that we were just going to do this certain amount of mileage each day, and then we'll get to the campsite, we'll have fun, we'll have some food and carry on. We didn't really think of the big picture. I think the hardest part was persuading you to cycle through Shepherd's Bush and to get to work.
Yeah, the roads of London are a lot worse than the roads of Europe.
Yeah, so I think once you've conquered cycling in London, you can go anywhere, really. So,
where did the idea of cycling to Istanbul come from? Was it simply that, it's kind of the furthest you can get away from Britain across Europe, or was there some other reason?
Definitely that, to an extent. The thought of sort of crossing the whole continent was quite a nice aim, and getting to the edge of Asia, quite a nice way to finish the trip. It was also the first holiday that we'd taken together to go out to Istanbul for a weekend. I was organised to go and do a running race there. Matt then far exceeded me and decided to sign up for the marathon. So we took our first weekend away together, and both ran that race. I did 15 kilometres, Matt did the full way. And so it was always somewhere quite special to us to return to, and we thought, so a few years later, it'd be a great place to finish the trip.
So actually, you've just kind of let the cat out of the bag there. I mean, bearing in mind that you're both runners, you must have been in pretty good condition when you set off to cycle to Istanbul.
I guess we were relatively fit. We do sport and we go running quite a bit of yoga. But long distance cycling, you never really know until you actually get into it. I think we did maybe 40 or 50 mile days as practice, but then we maybe set off thinking we could probably do a bit more than that because we've got more time. So I think the first couple of days were 90, nearly 100 Ks each day. And by the time we got to the Netherlands, we were pretty shattered. You had a bit of a sore knee, those kind of things. But yeah, we were fit, but we knew that with cycle touring, from the books we read and research we did, you get fitter as you go, really. And if you want a break, you can just have a break. We made sure we had enough time to have a day off each week, you know.
We definitely relied on gaining fitness as we went along, which in hindsight was a bit of a mistake for the first few weeks of pain. But, you know, we didn't have all that much time to do a lot of training. We were working right up until a few days before we left. So we just thought it was all part of the journey.
I think that's another thing why I love doing the films and making it very apparent that we were complete novices, really. And whatever fitness you are, you can just start off. Even if you maybe do a 20 or 30 Ks a day to start off, anyone can ride a bike and cycle, and you can do it at your own pace. So hopefully the films will show you, especially on the Rhine, because it is pretty much flat the whole way. We're hoping that it will inspire other people to do it, because we never knew that we'd love it so much, but we just came back so passionate about it, and it's such a nice, eco-friendly way, socially distanced way, especially in this world. But it's a great way to travel, and as you know, it's a bit cliche, but cycling at that speed, you really get to, I guess, see and smell everything properly. If you're walking, maybe you can't cover enough distance. If you're in a car or a motorbike, a bit too quick. But you really get to engage with the country, and we obviously saw it change so much from London to Istanbul. There's just so much change. And it's not actually even that gradual. We found it change so quickly from Western to Eastern Europe, and then when we went up into the mountains, that was some pretty spectacular cycling. So the trip had everything, really, but I digress.
We're going to hear 4 clips, I think, from the video, and that's probably a good point to listen to the first clip, which is right at the start of the video, and you are introducing yourself and you're just explaining your plans for the course of the next few months.
I'm Harriet.
And I'm Matt.
And in this 3-part series, we'll be cycle touring across Europe, from our home in London to Istanbul on the edge of Asia.
And in this first episode, we cycle from our home in London to Harwich, where we take the overnight ferry to the Hook of Holland and continue up to Amsterdam. We then head south through the Netherlands and join the EuroVelo 15 on the River Rhine and continue into Germany via its spectacular Rhine Gorge and numerous castles, before reaching the stunning city of Strasbourg in France and beautiful Basel in Switzerland. Here the river heads east to the dramatic Rhine Falls, then briefly into Austria and Liechtenstein, before ending this section of our journey in Chur, Switzerland.
So that's you starting the journey, starting the video for the first part of the journey all the way to Switzerland-ish. Now, in terms of preparation, in terms of things like camping, in terms of the bikes, did you have all the equipment that you needed, or did you have to go out and kind of equip yourselves prior to the trip?
We did have to equip ourselves with pretty much everything we needed, including the bikes that we cycled on.
So just pause there. The bikes, tell me about the bikes, because presumably they are the 2 bikes named Monte and Komodo. Where did those names come from?
That's right. So my bike is Monty. It's a Dawes Caracum touring bike with lovely butterfly handlebars. Never seen them before, but that's what it came with. It was an ex-display bike from Evans Cycles, and I found them absolutely brilliant. The name Monty was just a name I liked from one of our previous trips. We'd visited Montenegro and had done a bit of cycling there, and so that was a pretty straightforward name for me.
My bike still is. It's a Fuji touring bike, and it was also an ex-display from Evans Cycles. That we found worked really well because we didn't know if we're going to cycle much in the future, etc. So we didn't want to spend thousands on a bike. So we kept on looking on Evans Cycles for ex-displays. And as soon as one came up in our size locally, we went and saw it and snapped it up. I was really like my bike because it's a lovely dark green colour. I thought it looked quite nice and had good reviews. And I called mine Komodo. We both work in travel, as we said, and we met once in the Komodo Islands on work, which sounds terrible, but it was good times. So we had really good memories from Komodo, so I decided to call it Komodo as well because it's green as well. So
and in terms of things like camping, in terms of cooking, things like that, were you I mean, you work in the travel industry. Are you used to 5-star luxury hotels? Was this kind of a real move to the other end of the travel spectrum, or had you experience of, dare I say, slumming it in a tent and cooking your own meals?
Yeah, we'd both done quite a bit of camping as children on family holidays, and definitely both had great memories. Stayed in a fair share of very nice hotels around the world, but haven't paid for those ourselves for the most part. So that's always part of the perk of the job. But no, we did have to invest in all of the gear that we took, because we spent about 2 years planning the trip while we were waiting to get our joint sabbatical signed off as well. We had quite a bit of time to buy individual pieces, and we spent a lot of time doing research about which tent we'd buy, which stove we'd buy, to make sure it was the right fit, it was the right sort of weight, and would be flexible enough for the whole trip. So we did have to buy pretty much everything we needed, but we actually loved the camping part of the trip. Matt, not so much in terms of the sleeping element of camping. He's a very light sleeper, and some of the busy campsites in Germany and the Netherlands over the summer holidays were pretty noisy, but we really loved the experience and the flexibility of being able to turn up somewhere and just have everything we needed ready to go.
Well, yeah, because when I watched the video, I recognised that campsite you stayed in Cologne, and the biggest problem there is the noise of the traffic from the bridge. I remember staying on that campsite and it just being the roar of traffic all night long from the bridge I think it was just to the south of Cologne.
Yes, there's always something. At another campsite, we had a lovely riverside spot with nobody else around us, but a ship turned up in the night and decided just to hang around right in the middle of the river all night, making lots of noise, so you can never quite tell.
Yeah, I don't mind a bit of white noise to go to sleep to, but that was a huge tanker just at the start of the Rhine, and it was just so noisy, wasn't it? And that stage in July as well, it's nearly 40 degrees, so it's quite hard sleeping in a tent, and especially when you're tired, you just want to have a good sleep. And I think the worst one for me really was in Germany at the Bodensee, when there was just so many families on their school holidays, and they were there just for a few nights, having a great time, staying up late, TVs in the tents, that kind of thing, really loud, and I found it quite difficult, which was why maybe once, sometimes twice a week, we had a cheap hostel or a hotel just to get a really good sleep and charge batteries and that kind of thing. But I loved camping. I loved the whole idea of it. I just didn't really sleep very well on a camp bed. I got better as the time went on, but part and parcel really.
Yeah. I mean, I love camping, but yeah, I can think of some examples where I've been. I remember one place in Spain where it was just full of kids, and I was furious, and these kids just wouldn't go to bed. And I'm thinking, what kind of parents are you? These kids were running around at midnight, and there I was, knackered after cycling God knows how many kilometres, and all I wanted to do was sleep, but I couldn't because of the racket from these kids. And yeah, I felt like putting my kind of teacher hat on, going round and reprimanding them for being bad parents. But anyway, now you actually in the video you say, or you confess, although it's a good confession to have, you are foodies and you particularly appreciate good food. And we're just going to listen to another clip where you're talking about the food that you prepare as you are cycling.
Knowing the importance of a good hearty meal and being able to make a cup of coffee in the morning, having a decent, reliable stove was a must, and we went for the MSR Whisperlight Universal. Whichever stove you go for, we really recommend a few trial runs before you set off. This lightweight, hard-wearing stove took both gas and petrol, which later on in Eastern Europe became very handy. Many campsites had benches and tables, and some had full-on canteens where you could go and cook and use a microwave and a fridge, but we highly recommend having at least a small ground tarpaulin, so you could basically lay out your table on the floor without getting grass and mud and bugs into your food. So what do we eat? The staples of our diet changed throughout the trip, but I'd usually wake up first and get some water boiling for our morning coffee, and then boil up some more for porridge. I'd make it a bit tastier and more nutritious with whatever we had, usually sultanas, peanut butter and some fruit. This we found sustained us a lot more than eggs and bread, and was easier to transport with no real risk of it going off. For dinner we'd usually stop at a shop by around mid-afternoon, pick up some fruit and things for a snack, and then just basically buy whatever's on offer. The most popular options were, as I've already said, the famous smash with pork steaks and red cabbage, my all-time favourite, or making chicken fajitas, making spag bowl, cheesy tuna pasta, cheesy vegetable pasta, chicken pesto pasta, and a very hearty goulash from a tin. Goulash. Leftover tomatoes and mushrooms, and also peas and carrots from a tin. Most campsites also had a little shop for backup food, as well as ice cream and a fridge full of local beer and wine.
Now, I have to say, I'm not brilliant when it comes to cooking and cycling and camping. My diet normally consists of fresh pasta and pesto, and that is kind of what I eat repeatedly. But you had a really wide range. We just heard it there. You had a really wide range of things that you ate. Was that kind of a difficult thing to achieve, that quality of food?
It wasn't really, for the most part, particularly in Western Europe, where we did have very easy access to supermarkets, inexpensive food, and quite a range. We are definitely foodies, and I suppose that was one of the elements that I wasn't prepared to compromise on. While cycling and while camping, I love to cook and we love to eat, and we wanted to make sure that while we were going to be fueling ourselves, that we'd also want to have some really nice food along the way. So it was always something I looked forward to. We did eat a lot of porridge for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, but that evening meal was always a bit more adventurous, and actually trying to cook something slightly more elaborate with 2 pans on a single stove was a bit of a challenge, but quite a good fun challenge at the end of the day. And I definitely think that's where we had our bit of luxury along the tour. That's where we splashed out a bit, is on a nice meal on occasion, once or twice a week in a nice restaurant or a cafe, somewhere where we could try the local food, because that's something that we really enjoyed in each different country along the way.
You need it, don't you, when you're cycling? You just get so hungry, like I said, and I'm very lucky because Haz is an amazing cook and can just rustle something up out of pretty much nothing. So it was never in doubt, really. But yeah, we did eat really well, and you do need it. You do need your calories and your vitamins and vegetables and things. So it was a vital part, and it just became second nature, really, to pick up something in the afternoon, whatever's on sale in the meat department maybe, or the vegetables, and just make something really tasty, usually with a bottle of wine somewhere.
Did you ever invite any of your fellow cycle tourists round for a dinner party on your lavish food?
That's a great question. We didn't actually know. We were possibly a bit selfish cooking for ourselves. We did have a great experience in a campsite just outside Zurich, where the elderly couple in a very large tent and caravan had noticed our meals getting more elaborate the few days that we spent there as a bit of a break by the beautiful lake in Zurich. And they actually offered us their spare camping chair and table so that we could have a proper sit-down dinner, which was very sweet of
Small
them.
things.
There's a really nice comment on the video on YouTube. Wrote it down if I can find it. Somebody has said, "It was great to see cycle tourists using a campsite rather than wild camping," which I think is quite nice, because you do tend to see lots of things on YouTube where people do it in a very kind of minimalistic way, and they kind of, they'll find a bush or a rock to sleep under and things like that, which is kind of very exciting and very adventurous, but it doesn't actually reflect probably the reality of the majority of people who go cycle touring. Did you have quite a good budget to spend on a daily basis, or were you just very good at buying good quality food on a relatively small amount?
We did set a budget for ourselves just with what we'd saved for the trip, although we really didn't know before we set out how far that would go. In Western Europe, particularly through to France, Germany, the Netherlands, we found that we spent a bit more than we'd intended to, and that was about €75 per day for the two of us. That covered all of our food and extra sightseeing and camping, which we did primarily stay in campsites throughout. In Switzerland in the summer, you can easily pay €40 for a piece of grass in a campsite, so it's not great value. But then, when we reached Eastern Europe, you can pay €12 for a hotel or a room for the night, and we spent significantly less than we were expecting to day to day. So we were just quite fortunate that over the trip we managed to work within our budget. We did have to sort of shift that as we went and found out what we'd be spending.
Yeah, I think on some of the days where we spent a bit more, we would just have on our notepad plus 20 or something. So we knew the next day we'd have to have quite a cheap day. And it generally worked like that, and it worked really well. We ended up pretty much on budget, and we had a little bit left over for when we got to Istanbul. And, you know, budget-wise as well, we only had a few mechanical issues, but we made sure we had a bit of contingency just in case we needed something fixed. So
this is an insane conversation to be having, isn't it? If you think about it in the context of travel. I mean, people go on holiday and they'll spend €35 on breakfast quite happily if they go on a holiday somewhere. I think as cycle tourists, we kind of almost feel guilty about spending money, and you're only a worthy cycle tourist if you can do everything for under 50 cents a day.
We did feel slightly fraudulent that we only wild camped one night within the whole trip, and as you mentioned, we did rely on campsites mostly, both for the facilities, a nice hot or cold shower at the end of the day is a real treat, and also the security and knowing we've got somewhere with power to charge our electrical items. But to us that wasn't sort of the most important part of being adventurous, and we didn't spend a great deal on the meals that we did cook, but that meant we could splash out on those few meals out along the way, which were really memorable.
Well, just on that point, that brings us nicely to the next clip, because here you are cycling down the Rhine. I think you've just been to a campsite and you've thought, that doesn't look very nice, and decide to keep cycling. So let's just hear the commentary of that little bit of the video.
Very tired now. It's been a very hot day, and we just got to the campsite. It looked absolutely awful. We're fortunate enough that there's quite a few campsites around, so you can pick and choose sometimes. Decided to carry on another 8-9k. Looked on the map, and there's another campsite coming up here somewhere in about 4k's time. It looks really nice. They mentioned wine straight away on their website, so bodes well. Completely changed as well. The whole landscape's changed. It's all really, really flat now, and the riverbed is huge. There's lots of islands and little inlets and things. Compared to about 2 hours ago, and we're going through the most amazing gorges. So it's been one of the best days scenically, that's for sure.
We'll be back with Matt and Harriet Hall in a few minutes. The monologue in this episode of the Cycling Europe podcast comes from Robin Watkins, who has travelled extensively in Europe on his bike, but here he's reflecting on the time he spent travelling through the Czech Republic, or as it's now called, Czechia.
Hi, I'm Robin. I live in London, and I've been cycle touring with my partner Erica since 2013. Our first experience was cycling from London to Paris, and we were bitten by the cycle touring bug so much that the next year we packed in our jobs and headed off on a 4-month adventure, taking a rather scenic route from Bordeaux in southwest France to the channel port of Dunkirk. On our journey, we cycled as far east as Vienna before turning north, heading towards Hamburg and eventually home. In total, we travelled through 7 countries and rode over 6,000 kilometres. Our trip took us on many well-known and popular cycling routes, but we also spent time a little off the beaten track. One of the countries we visited was Czechia, previously the Czech Republic, where we spent 2 weeks crossing between Austria and Germany. To give an indication of our route, we entered the country almost due north of Vienna, then started a clockwise loop, tracking close to the border with Austria and eventually the border with Germany. We then headed inland towards Prague. From Prague, we rode north, crossing into Germany alongside the River Elbe. I'd like to share my experiences of Czechia in the context of the 4 things that I think make for a good cycle tour. Firstly, and most obviously, good cycling, ideally on cycle paths and quiet roads. Next, interesting places to visit, places that aren't on the usual tourist trail. I like to experience the local culture through food and drink, so I want to have plenty of opportunities for both. And finally, it should be easy to find somewhere to stay, either camping or B&Bs, and ideally not too expensive. So let's start with good cycling. A particularly pretty stretch of cycling was after the popular tourist stop of Český Krumlov in the southwest of the country. Here we climbed into the Šumava National Park, which runs just alongside the border with Germany. It's the largest national park in Czechia, and a network of cycle paths crisscrosses the area. We followed Route 33, which takes quiet roads, forest trails, and even one or two cobbled sections up through the park. The cycling was quite tough, as we had to haul our heavily laden bikes up several climbs, at one point reaching close to 4,000 feet. On one of the steeper sections, we discovered that the Czechs prefer to ride in one direction only, downhill, and use the bus to get their bikes to the top. We eventually had our own version of this, descending for almost 30 kilometers as we left the park heading towards the city of Pilsen. We really enjoyed our time in the Šumava, riding through dense forest where locals were picking mushrooms and alongside mountain streams. We even read that the area has a population of lynx, although unfortunately we weren't lucky enough to see any. Next, interesting places to visit. There are a number of pretty towns dotted along the southern edge of the country, including tiny Slavonice, which is situated on an old trade route between Prague and Vienna. We arrived here after a day of riding through unspoilt countryside close to the border with Austria. This area was fortified after World War II and once formed part of the Iron Curtain. The Renaissance buildings in Slavonitza's main square date back to the 16th century and are decorated with sgraffito, a technique which involves scratching the outer layer of the building to reveal a contrasting colour underneath. It's used to draw intricate designs on the buildings, including artwork and scenes from the Bible. We spent the night here, dining at a cafe whose breakfast menu included a Cuban breakfast, a curious combination of a shot of rum, a cigar, and the loan of a picture of Fidel Castro. Although we picked something else, I'm sure that this would be a great way to kickstart a day's cycling. Ride 20 miles north of Slavonice, past fields of corn and forests of strongly scented pine trees, and you'll find Telch, one of the prettiest places we visited on the entire trip. Larger than Slavonice, the main square is packed full of more 16th century buildings, this time in pastel shades of blue, yellow, red and green. Many have gabled roofs, with colonnades at ground level, and shops, bars, cafes, restaurants, and even our B&B contained within. We visited Telch during the town's annual folk festival, and took some time out of cycling to spend the afternoon soaking up the atmosphere, watching music and theatrical performances taking place in the main square. The next thing I enjoy is good food and drink, and if you like to finish a tough day's cycling with a glass of something cold, then Czechia does not disappoint. Czech beer has a great reputation worldwide, and we were lucky to stay in 3 towns with links to the brewing industry: České Budějovice, Třeboň, and Pilsen. České Budějovice is home to the Budweiser Budvar brewery, and having set our sights on a tour, we cycled 20 miles through absolutely torrential rain in order to get there on time. The tour covered all parts of the brewing process, including a very clever closed-loop recycling program, where returned bottles are cleaned and relabeled before being filled with beer and dispatched nationwide. But by far the best part is getting a nice cold sample in the cellar, where the beer is matured before being bottled. This more than made up for us getting soaked to the skin on the ride there. Those who prefer wine are also well catered for. Our first night in Czechia was in Mikulov, 2 kilometers from the Austrian border. It's another pretty town with a huge castle overlooking the centre. Mikulov is close to the main wine-growing areas of the country, and we spent an enjoyable evening on the terrace of a cafe, tasting a selection of crisp white wines produced in the local area. Finally, accommodation. Up until this point, we've been camping as much as possible in order to stay within our budget, but we found campsites to be few and far between. Wild camping isn't really our thing, so we ended up staying in more B&Bs and pensions than usual. Not necessarily an issue, because they were well priced and good quality. We never struggled to find a place for the night, but generally booking online worked better than through tourist information centres. However, after a while, we started to get tired of finding accommodation every evening, and longed for the quiet simplicity and lower cost of camping. On one day in particular, we found ourselves riding in temperatures of over 30 C with a fierce headwind to zap our energy, and in the early afternoon we were feeling low and lethargic. To brighten our mood, I found a campsite on my phone, and we took a detour with the intention of spending the night there. The detour involved a long climb, and you can imagine our disappointment when the place I found turned out not to be a campsite, but a children's holiday park. Given the trouble riding there, we did not take this news particularly well. On the way to the campsite, we passed a hotel. As we retraced our steps, we stopped outside and decided to ask about a room. It turned out that they did have a room available, but there was some kind of event taking place that evening. As we don't speak Czech, we weren't sure about exactly what was happening, but didn't really want to ride further to find somewhere else, so we took the room on offer. The event turned out to be a concert from a local rock group, and we ended up spending the evening listening to the band, drinking, dancing, and hanging out with a crowd of Czech rock fans who certainly didn't expect to find a pair of English cyclists in their midst. I hope this gives a good overview of our experiences in Czechia. Unlike other parts of Europe, we didn't come across many other touring cyclists, only 2 sets in the entire 2 weeks. We met 2 guys from London who had just set out on a very long ride to Vietnam, and a German couple who spend a few weeks each year cycling the EuroVelo 13 Iron Curtain Trail. I hope that our experience shows that the country offers plenty of excitement for touring cyclists, from pretty towns to national parks, and I hope that it might encourage you to consider it for your next trip.
Thanks, Robin. That was an excellent insight into cycling in one of Europe's landlocked countries. If you'd like to record your own monologue for the podcast, please get in touch by emailing podcast@cyclingeurope.org or by sending a message via social media @cyclingeurope. Now back to Matt and Harriet, who are continuing their journey to Istanbul. Okay, so the first video, as I said, is mainly about the Rhine. In fact, it's all about the Rhine, I think. What were the highlights of cycling down the Rhine?
I think for us, the highlights, well, the first one was reaching the Rhine. That was pretty special. It took us a few days to ride from London to Amsterdam, where we had a little break because we were sore and we just wanted to enjoy Amsterdam before we really started. So then the next day when we got down to the Rhine proper, it felt like the real start of our adventure, and that was really exciting. But then I think definitely one of the highlights was the gorge area down in Germany, because we'd been cycling through a lot of flat sort of farmlands and canals and rivers and things, and then as soon as you reach the gorge, all of a sudden you've got hills and you've got castles and the vineyards and the ancient little villages, and it was just so much to see everywhere you looked. It was really, really interesting. It was hard not to just keep stopping and taking photos or video for me, but that was quite spectacular after going through quite flat lands. We then also really loved the Alps. I haven't really done much of a sort of skiing heritage or anything like that. I've only been a few times, but because cycling on the Rhine is mostly flat, as soon as you get to Switzerland, all of a sudden you've got the mountains in the distance and you feel like, where is this route going to take us? We eventually got to Liechtenstein and we decided to pop in, almost to tick a country off, but the Rhine does go through there, and so does the EuroVelo 15, so we thought, let's go and have a few nights there in a campsite. We ditched the bikes for a couple of days, and did a nice walking trail for a whole day through the Liechtenstein mountains, and it just added something really different to the trip, and it was really, really, really beautiful. Yeah, I think they were probably the 2 highlights. We also loved going through the different cities as well, so Basel was really beautiful. We'd love to return to Basel one day. I was really impressed with that. And then we loved places like Cologne and Dusseldorf. Such a lovely atmosphere at sunset. You can have a beer on the river, and it was just nice to see a lot of people, because sometimes it's quite quiet. Yeah, so that was it really. It's just got so much variety.
And in terms of cycling down the Rhine, I've done bits of it. I've done from kind of Strasbourg down to Basel. Actually, I seem to remember I didn't see the Rhine until quite a distance from Strasbourg, because I was on the French side, and the route actually follows the canal. So I was following a canal, and then I remember at one point getting frustrated that I hadn't seen the Rhine. I was supposed to be cycling by the Rhine. I hadn't actually seen the damn thing. And so I made an effort to go and find it one day. But if you are following, you were on the German side, weren't you?
We did cover Strasbourg on the French side as well, but we had done quite a lot of the Rhine along the German side until then.
And what's the route like on that side? Is it as good as I imagine? Is it just one continuous route that takes you, really without looking at the signs, all the way from Amsterdam down to Basel?
It pretty much is. So you get all the way to... Is it pretty much all the way to Strasbourg? Is mostly through the German part, and then you hop into France, and then you do the last stretch into Strasbourg. And then after Strasbourg, like you said, you've got the canals that take you pretty much all the way to Basel, which are quite monotonous, but it's still really enjoyable. The section between the Netherlands all the way to Strasbourg was absolutely beautiful. And then
it's also very industrial, so there are a lot of big plants along the river, which rely on either the water or the transport on the river. So although you do get those lovely riverside paths and just manage to cruise along without a great deal of direction, there are also some pretty big towns and cities and quite a lot of very industrial areas. So it's not all pure peace and quiet, but it's a really interesting change from those higher reaches of the wide Rhine. We did it backwards, so from mouth to source rather than source to mouth. But then it changes so much when you get down to that southern part of Germany after Strasbourg and Basel.
Yeah, I was quite happy actually in the video when you said you got lost near Cologne, because I got lost near Cologne, and there's that massive Bayer industrial plant just to the north of Cologne, which I was heading north. I could have burnt the place down, quite frankly. I was so frustrated at having lost my route for the 10th time. There were few and far between those problems. It looked fairly, if I was doing the whole thing, it did look fairly plain sailing.
It was very well signposted as well, that it is the most developed EuroVelo route, and we found that it was incredibly easy to follow, mostly apart from those few days where we did find ourselves a bit lost around a town or an industrial estate area.
I think when you're in the cities though, you kind of, if you're not in a rush, it's okay, because you can cycle slowly through them and have a stop for some food or a drink, and then you just got to find the river again. And the cities in Germany are right on the river, so it's very easy to find the EuroVelo 15 again. And then, like we said, as soon as you get down past Cologne and Bonn, it's then just perfect cycle touring right on the river, nice smooth tarmac. And then you get down to Strasbourg, which was an amazing city as well. We really enjoyed Strasbourg. We had 3 nights there, I think, or 2 nights. But we really enjoyed our city stopovers, because it kind of gave us a break, but also got us excited to get back on the bike again.
Yeah, it's a nice contrast, isn't it? Being able to visit the cities and then escape again into the countryside. Are there any bits of the route that actually you regretted and you thought, I think we could have done better there if we'd gone somewhere slightly different?
I think because we follow the EuroVelos, the answer would be no, because the EuroVelos are built so well, and it says on their website as well, they try to build the EuroVelos where they think it's going to be interesting, but also cycle friendly and flat, lots of logistics there, so accommodation and places to eat. So we were just really happy with the route, and that's because the EuroVelos were so good and they take us the right way. Yeah, we got lost in a few cities sometimes, but
never mattered too much.
No.
I think the only place where we would have done it differently in hindsight would be cycling through Turkey. The Iron Curtain Trail finishes in a town called Kirklareli, which doesn't have great transport links. We'd read a few blogs which had some pretty terrible stories about the D202, I believe it is, which takes you into Istanbul along a major highway, which is a bit scary. So we had tried to sort of design a route that was going to avoid some of that and take us to the Black Sea as well. And we actually found that really difficult, not very nice cycling for the last few days of the tour, which was really a big shame, and also quite a disappointing experience getting to the Black Sea, which we thought would be our sort of grand finale, and was a bit of a letdown in the end.
Okay, well, again, we'll come to that in a second, because this is the end of the video that you've made. You've arrived in Liechtenstein, and I think you've decided to stay there for a few nights before heading or continuing down the Danube. So let's just listen to this very end bit of the video.
We found the Rhine route very manageable and, as you've seen, incredibly enjoyable. We did benefit from having glorious weather and minimal bike issues over these 4 weeks. This certainly changed as we headed towards the Balkans.
You can continue to the source high up in the mountains. We chose, however, to cycle to Reichenau, where the 2 Rhine tributaries meet, the Vorderrhein and the Hinterrhein, thus making this the official start of the River Rhine itself. We have loved the Rhine cycle route and we're incredibly impressed with the organisation of the EuroVelo 15, from its excellent signage to its choice of route. And we really hope this film helps to inspire others to take on the ride. Whether you head upriver like we did, or from Switzerland to the Hook of Holland, we're sure you're going to have the most incredible ride. Our journey now continues through Switzerland for a little holiday with Harriet's family, before we ride up to the source of the Danube and head east towards Romania, then south to Istanbul.
You've now got as far as Liechtenstein. You've done about a quarter of the route that you intend doing, something like that?
Yeah, that's about right.
So, right, tell us about the Danube. Tell us about the Iron Curtain Trail.
So we finished in Switzerland at the end of the EuroVelo 15, and then we had a couple of days break with Harriet's family because it was her dad's birthday, and it was a really good little breather. Again, I could have a nice bed for a night rather than on the camp bed, so that I enjoyed that. And then we cycled from Zurich up to Donaueschingen, which is the source of the Danube in Germany, and it's where the EuroVelo joins. So the EuroVelo 6 joins from, it goes from all the way from the Atlantic coast in France all the way to Romania on the Black Sea, and we decided to start at the source and then cycle all the way to Romania. And the EuroVelo 6 is really, really well developed, so it was again quite easy cycling, quite flat, and had lovely campsites and that kind of thing. And then we entered through Austria, and then we went all the way through, went into Bratislava, which is the first kind of Eastern Europe section that we did. And then that goes down into Hungary, and then Hungary was just a huge big plain. It was a vast openness of nothingness, wasn't it?
Very hot, very flat.
Very, very hot and flat. And then that took us down into, briefly into Serbia, before we finished our section in Romania.
We found this route really interesting. I'm glad that we'd done the Rhine as a sort of great introduction and almost training, as over sort of 3 weeks we'd really got to grips with cycling those sort of distances day to day and setting up camp each evening, what food we needed. And so the first half of the Danube, Germany, Austria, was really comfortable, but then we really felt like we were getting into much more adventurous territory. Slovakia, Hungary, then into Serbia.
What do you mean by adventurous? I mean, how was it different? Was it the campsites? Was it the lack of amenities? Was it the fact that you couldn't get your nice ingredients for your lavish meals?
All of those things. The camping facilities were much fewer and further between. Actually, in Hungary, there are a couple of really nice little locally run, what I imagine are actually people's back gardens, where they had a room or a couple of tent spaces. But really further on from there, we found very few campsites available in Serbia into Romania. So we had to become much more reliant on planning ahead. We also didn't speak the language in any of these countries, so even navigation became more challenging. Buying food day to day was less familiar. So it felt much more exciting to us, which was great, but it definitely was a bit more challenging day to day in terms of how we needed to plan and organise ourselves.
And you mentioned wild camping earlier. Where did you actually do the wild camping?
We always managed to find some accommodation on the EuroVelo 6 somehow. There's always somewhere to stay. But then the EuroVelo 13, it's a lot more rogue, isn't it, really? There's a lot less accommodation, but there's just a lot less villages and towns as well. There's really nothing sometimes, up in the mountains especially. And there was one morning where we looked at our map and we knew it was either going to be a really big day or we'd stumble across something. We saw on the internet, just looking on Google Maps, that there might be accommodation. And then when we got there wasn't anything. And it was getting to about 4 or 5 o'clock. And by then, we'd normally like to have a campsite set up or in a cheap hotel or something. So we thought, right, this is the night. We're going to do it. We're going to be real cycle tourists, as you call it, and go for a wild camp.
We were in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Bulgaria, so there were plenty of opportunities for sneaking off into a field. It did turn out to be the coldest night of the trip as well, of course. So we woke up in thick frost, but all part of the fun of it.
Yeah, it's absolutely freezing, wasn't it? And I remember the morning, it was so cold that after we made our porridge, my feet were so frozen from the night because my sleeping bag wasn't very good. And we put the porridge bowls on the top of my feet just to try and thaw my feet out. And then the bikes were both frozen solid, so we just had to kind of walk them for a bit. But it was a really great experience. I mean, again, I didn't really sleep much because I was a bit paranoid and I thought I heard people or pigs, and you never know, and they always give you horror stories, but everything was fine and you slept right through, didn't you, again?
That is not my idea of cycle touring, and I can imagine myself in that position. I would be really outside my comfort zone. Did you feel uneasy about that whole situation?
Yes, definitely. I was quite cautious. I wanted to get the lights or our one little solar lamp off by the time it was dark. We had someone walking along the road nearby a bit later on. There really wasn't anything to be scared of, but it definitely was outside our comfort zone, which is why, especially in more developed countries, we chose just to enjoy the facilities of campsites, and we'd saved up for the trip, so we knew we had enough that we could stay in campsites or in accommodation every night, especially when in Eastern Europe we were already sort of 6 or 7 weeks into the trip. We'd done a lot of camping, a little bit tired of camping potentially, so we just took advantage of the very inexpensive accommodation that we could do.
Do you think it's something that if you do it over and over and over again, you eventually just get used to it, and you those noises in the night, the fact that you've kind of playing in the back of your mind you might be doing something potentially illegal, or do you think those fears go away if you continue doing it for a long time?
I definitely think that's true. I think the more you do it, the easier you're going to spot a location, or the more relaxed you're going to feel. We know a lot of cycle tourists do it, especially as you head out of Europe. It's pretty much the norm. I think I might have personally, both of us, I suppose, would have felt more comfortable in Western Europe, although there's very few places you can wild camp legally. At least they're probably going to speak English, or you can probably converse with them a little bit. Whereas in Bulgaria, right up in the mountains, and these were very poor sort of mountain communities, it's incredibly friendly and welcoming when you meet them, and they're giving you food and things like that. But in the middle of the night, if somebody comes and you can't really explain what's going on, and it was never going to happen, but we just felt a bit paranoid. But overall, it was a really enjoyable experience, and we knew that if we had to do it again later on, then we could. So, but we, like Harriet said, we saved up enough to make sure we had enough for a campsite or a cheap hotel, and we just really enjoyed that part of it as well.
Yeah, the reality is probably, I would imagine, that actually you're probably statistically at greater risk if you're on some nice campsite in the Dordogne than you are in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Europe on on the side of a hill that you've found, because in a campsite in Western Europe it's a kind of honeypot to anybody who wants to come and nick your bike, or nick all your equipment or whatever you've got with you. Whereas in the middle of nowhere, in perhaps a more remote area, then people are just, if you're a thief, you're not going to go and find these cycle tourists in the middle of the mountains, are you? It's just not going to happen.
But we were very fortunate. We were very sensible too, but we didn't have anything stolen along the way to start with, at least for the first few weeks. Again, I was quite cautious about making sure our bikes were in view, making sure our panniers were locked up, and the tent was all safe, and that we weren't leaving it for a long period of time. And we definitely got more relaxed as the trip went on, as we had good experiences all the way.
I think that helps being a couple and cycling. As you know as well, if you cycle solo, you have to keep everything on your body, or at least your most valuable bits and bobs. So because there was two of us, if we're going to pop into a shop or something on the way, one of us could stand outside in the car park and just wait with everything. It's a lot easier, and also you can share the load, share the experiences, the highs and lows. But I think travelling as a couple just meant that we didn't get anything stolen. We did lose things, but that's mostly my fault by not packing correctly. We did lose one quite important piece, which was our EuroVelo 13 map, which was incredibly difficult to find anyway. We actually had to find it online and then send it to a hotel in Bratislava, and it was pretty vital because there was no signage. So we lost that map somewhere in Bulgaria somewhere.
Yes.
But then thankfully after that, when you're there, there's not really any cycle lanes anyway. You're just following these huge roads, or B roads we'd kind of call them in England. So we just looked on Google Maps and said, okay, we've got to follow that road to this town and carry on from there. But yeah, the maps were very useful later on, but you didn't really even need them in Western Europe.
I've got to ask you about the film and the equipment that you used to film it. Now, you said earlier that you didn't really intend making a film initially, but you did take with you the equipment to make films, including a drone. And having just bought a drone myself a few weeks ago, and I'm kind of still at the primary level of learning how to use the thing, they're a lot of fun, and you get some amazing shots. How did you find using that? Did you have any issues? Did you ever crash it? Did you have any issues with people saying, "Oh, what are you doing, filming my whatever"?
I was like you actually, so I just bought it. I hadn't had much experience, and trying to edit some of the footage where I'm just flying it willy-nilly is very difficult. So I had to kind of cut the bits which are the most steady, and thankfully there was enough to use to make bits of the film. So the equipment we took was very, very basic, because I wasn't going to go out there to essentially do a blockbuster movie or anything. We just wanted to film a few things and send it back to mum and dad and friends and family. But the idea was to have as simple equipment as possible. So we had a small Canon point and shoot camera that took 1080p video, so really easy, really small files as well, because I didn't want to be lugging around the laptop and hard drives and things. And then we had a very small tripod, which I would literally just hold in front of me and cycle along with it, which was a bit weird in the first couple of days, but then we just kind of got used to it, a bit like a friend or something. It's quite nice to just talk to it sometimes on the long stretches. It's quite sad. And it didn't have a GoPro or anything, so when it really rained, I put it away. So there's a couple of days which are missing, but thankfully we only had a couple of days of rain for the whole summer. And then the drone. So we had a DJI Spark drone, which I don't think they make them anymore, but essentially it's a very small drone, and we were able to power it by an external power pack. So we didn't have to go to a plug socket or anything. So if I popped it in the air for a few minutes, I could then just have it charging in the back of my pannier. So it was really convenient, really easy, and it didn't weigh anything. It was only as big as my hand really, so it didn't take up too much space. And it was generally really enjoyable to get it up and have a look and see what the scenery was like from where we are, and especially when we're going along the river and you've got a lovely cycle path. It's pretty spectacular, and especially up in the mountains in Liechtenstein and down in Bulgaria. I'm really, really happy we did take it. And then to actually edit everything and store everything, all I had was a Samsung tablet, and we found that was more than we needed. So I had a free app to edit everything together with. Now I'm back home, I've got a PC with some editing software for the movies, but on the go, I found it really simple just to pop in the clips and edit something together. And we didn't do any voiceovers or anything like that. It was all just very organic, I suppose.
What were the problems that you had with the drone?
Yeah, so the drone isn't with us anymore, so RIP the drone. We had a few instances where we lost it for a bit and then it came back, which was very nerve-wracking to say the least. But then in the last day, basically, so we got to Istanbul and then we had a few days off, so we went to Cappadocia, which was this incredible landscape of all these limestone casts and caves and just a beautiful landscape. So I did a bit of filming there. It was really windy and I knew it was on the limit, and normally you can just press a button which says return to home. So I was sending it home, but I think it just caught a really big gust of wind and it just flew off. And normally it would go up high to get away from some wind or something and then come back. So we were waiting there for 3 or 4 minutes thinking, okay, battery's probably going to die now. And then we lost signal on my phone. I didn't have a remote control or anything. I just controlled it from my phone. And we were looking out there in the distance, like this beautiful landscape, and just thinking, it's gone. What are we going to do?
Just never came back.
It just didn't come back. I think it found its home. It's just like, I'm done with you now. You've used me too much. I'm going to stay in Turkey.
We did then try to find it for the next few hours, driving our tiny little hire car all over
Like
this
4x4
moon crater scenery, and nearly breaking it in the process. And we never found a tiny little drone. So
some Turkish farmer's got it now, and he's got that last day of footage. But luckily, I always backed up the footage every day, so I didn't lose anything else. I just lost that last day, which would have been really cool ending. But yeah, got everything from the cycle. But
did you ever manage to film yourself while you were cycling?
We did. I found it really difficult. There's these sort of manual modes, automatic modes, where you can put it up and you can do a spiral or something like that. But when you're cycling, it was quite a cheap drone compared to some of the big ones that people have got. The tracking device wasn't too good on it, so Sometimes we'll be cycling and it'll be tracking us, and then it'll just stop and go somewhere else. So for the videos, all I needed was 1 or 2 seconds sometimes, so I managed to get some clips of us. But the best way I found was to just put it up high and then just cycle straight and then just have it film. That was the easiest way. But we did do a few times where I had the bar bag and I had my phone on top of the bar bag. Harriet would tell me if something was coming, but I'd be looking down on the phone trying to fly the drone as I'm cycling. But
the master of cycling and drone flying is, of course, Ryan van Duzer, and he has commented on your film. He has said, well done, I want to do this route someday. So he must be impressed. So well done. You've managed to impress Ryan. I interviewed him for the podcast a few months ago. He's a really infectiously enthusiastic chap. You've clearly convinced him that you're up to standard when it comes to using a drone. So
yeah, we're pretty proud of that one.
You've pinned it to the top, haven't you? So
yeah, exactly. You can tell I'm pretty proud of that one. Yeah. So yeah, well, I absolutely love his channel as well, and I really enjoyed your podcast with him, and it's really cool that he's watched our video too.
So Istanbul, you eventually got to Istanbul. Did you kind of party all night long when you got there, or did you just kind of collapse in a heap in a 4-star hotel?
Yes, the latter, and I think it was a 2-star hostel, but we did get a private room, which was fortunate because I got quite unwell at that point. Bit of a dodgy tummy. I think it was more so just the stopping cycling after 3 months and having quite a lot of rich food and relaxation. I don't think it agreed with me very well. So had a few days off to recover. Once we'd arrived in Istanbul, went to Cappadocia for a few days as a little mini side trip, which was great to see a little bit more of Turkey while we were there. And then we were lucky enough to come back to Istanbul for another 6 days and have some of our best friends and family join us, which was an amazing way to finish the trip. So that was absolutely fantastic. We spent a few days just exploring the city with them. We were pretty good guides by then, having covered a lot of ground ourselves, had some great meals out, and a great time catching up after 3 months on the road. And they very helpfully brought some of our luggage back with us on the flight back from Istanbul to London, because we did have quite a lot of kit to fly home by then.
So that all begs the question: where next? Are you gonna persuade your employers to give you a year off and cycle around the world?
Well, we definitely got the bug, that's for sure, and I'm really enjoying making the movies. So we definitely want to do some more cycling. It was really emotional finishing the last one, wasn't it? We were ready to stop because we were tired and we reached our end game, our end area. So we were like, we could have definitely carried on, but we're happy to go back to normal life now, and it's been an amazing adventure, but we definitely want more. We are hoping to do more of Europe because the EuroVelos are so great and we really enjoyed them. We want to explore some more of those, and there's more popping up all the time. We're going to take a bit of time off at the moment, aren't we, Haz?
Yeah, we're expecting our first baby in a couple of months' time. So for the first, next year, I suppose, we'll be off cycle touring a little bit, but it's something we'd love to do in the future with children. We were so inspired by seeing families in all sorts of ways cycling along with trailers, kids' bikes, kids' panniers. So it's definitely something we'll do in the future. We'd both love to do the Atlantic coast route, EuroVelo 1, and also the new Meuse River route, I believe, EuroVelo 19, which they've just brought out, which looks brilliant. Obviously relatively close to the UK, covering sort of northern France and Belgium and the Netherlands. So that'd be a lovely trip to do. Quite easy, familiar to us, not too dissimilar from the Rhine route. But further afield, we'd also love to do Bangkok to Singapore one day. And maybe there's a world trip in us at some point.
Who knows? I think it's just such a great thing to do with kids, because we found it really, we really grew as a relationship, I feel, because you get to learn everything about each other, and you get through, like I said, some of the low moments, and you just share so many great experiences every day. And then I feel if we did it with a family, the kids are going to, they're going to be more worldly, I suppose, and they're going to keep fit, and it's just got so many positives to it. So I feel it could be hopefully a YouTube series one day for us. I'm TBC on that, but I feel after, like Harriet said, we've seen so many families do it out there, even if it's just short sections. It's something we definitely want to do. So watch this space, I suppose.
Well, yeah, you need to compare notes with Tim and Laura Moss, of course, because they've now got 2 kids, and they're they've taken their kids around and about. I'm sure they have great fun.
You take a dog as well, can't you? I've seen people with dogs and donkeys and everything cycle touring. So, yeah.
Okay, well, wherever you end up going, good luck, and good luck with the films on YouTube. Where can people find them? What's the easiest way of finding them?
The easiest way is to go onto YouTube, first of all, and then if you just search for Matt Hall Cycle, that seems to take you to the right channel. And then we did the whole playlist, which is all the smaller day-by-day, I guess, vlogs from London to Istanbul. And then the 3 movies are going to be all on there as well. So the first one, the Rhine, is done. The Danube is nearly there, so it should be there in the next couple of weeks, I think. I'm really excited about this one because it's just a bit more, I guess, a bit more adventurous, where the Rhine is more of a how-to cycle tour and how to do the Rhine. And then the last one should be out as well hopefully by the time our baby's born, because then I might be a bit busier. So yeah, I'd love it if people support the channel, and we hope to do some, as I said, potentially a bit of a family YouTube channel in the future.
Yeah, and on Instagram we're at Monte and Komodo, so it's Monte and Komodo.
And there's a link on there to Harriet's blog as well, which basically details the exact mileage every day and where we stayed every day, what we had, all of our kit. So that's hopefully quite a useful blog for people to have a look at if they're looking to go cycle touring.
That was actually a question I didn't ask you. I was going to ask you about whether you kept diaries, and I was going to ask you if you kept separate diaries and whether you've compared your diaries 2 years later. Any of those?
I did keep a diary daily. Matt was a bit busy with his editing and sorting out all of the videos at the end of each day, but I did record what we'd done, where we'd been, what we'd seen, highlights and lowlights, but also the distances and durations of cycling from my little cycle computer, where we'd stayed, and all of that I then used to compile my blog posts sort of once a week or so.
It would make a fascinating book if somebody somewhere, perhaps a married couple where one of them loved cycle touring and one of them hated it, and they both wrote a diary, and you could read both sides of the story as they cycled wherever.
I think it'd make quite a funny film as well if you saw both sides of that too.
Dragging the other one along.
Luckily that wasn't our experience.
Yeah.
If you sell the idea to Netflix, you heard it here first. I want my bit of commission.
I generally feel that if you find someone that doesn't even like cycling, we could probably turn them into cycle tourists, because it's such a fun thing and anyone can do it. Yeah, it's funny you say we made a book as well. So we didn't, like you, we haven't written a book or anything, but we turned our blog into a book for a Christmas present, and it's so nice just to read through all the different memories and just pick up a page and have a read through. You probably find that as well. It's not like a holiday. A holiday you can maybe just have 1 or 2 major things, but something amazing happened every day. And
you two could probably do a cookbook.
you should do a cookbook, Haz. I think
it's being considered.
Okay, well, thank you, and good luck with the baby, and good luck with future travels.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Great talking to you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you.
And finally, I mentioned Brooksbank School at the start of the podcast. I wonder if any of you kept listening to the end. If you did, come and find me at school and tell me. If you're the first person to do so, I'll give you a signed copy of my most recent book. I suspect it might go unclaimed, but I live in hope and I'd love to be proved wrong. See you at school.